everyone. My name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the December 16th, 2024 edition of the show. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the universal declarations of the human rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the start of the show. So I have the first two, as Dick is under the weather and couldn't join us. So here we go. Number one, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Number two, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number three, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for herself or himself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection.
Number four, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for protection of his or her interests.
And as is our custom, we would like to thank Michael Putnam, who is the program director for WMNB, for airing the audio portions of our show on Fridays at 6 p.m. And of course to the fabulous staff here at NBCTC for helping us produce the show. So thank you, Matthew Tucker, Nicole A. Brown, and Joanne Hurlva for your invaluable assistance. As I mentioned, Dick is under the weather and can't join us. Rotten time to get sick during the holiday season.
I know.
But it does happen.
Have to stop and take care of yourself.
Yes, you do.
Yep.
And so we're going to start with, we always start the show with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we have somebody who's going to be reading them first, and then we're going to go on to Tim Snyder for the oligarchy speech.
Okay.
So, whenever you are ready, we can have the Universal Declarations read.
Article 23. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests.
Okay, and I think we ought to have her read them every time and save ourselves some breath. I didn't realize it was a duplication. I thought she was elaborating a little bit more. So Dick wanted the show to be supplemented with us speaking about oligarchies and having an explanation of what they are. And so Timothy Snyder, who has been who we've used before on the show, happens to have an article on that. And then we're going to come back to you.
Okay.
So,
a doctor, a professor at Yale.
Yale,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So, things I don't know because I don't have time to do the research. So, whenever you're ready, Timothy Snyder speaking on oligarchy.
Hi, I'm Tim Snyder. This is the third of these talks. The idea is that I'm going to speak about things that are on my mind, maybe things that I'm thinking about but haven't written about yet. And the way I'm going to do it is just pick a single topic for each one. And now that I've done a couple, I'm starting to hear from some of you in real life over email what you would like to hear about. And one of the requests was oligarchy. Oligarchy. What is it? Is it a thing? Should we worry about it? It's a thing, and we should worry about it. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about where it came from, what it is, and at the very end, what we might do about it. So, what is oligarchy? What does the word mean? It's a Greek word. It means the rule of the few, and just the very fact that it's a Greek word, an ancient Greek word, is a useful signal of something, and it's a signal of how politics is full of all kinds of possibilities. The Greeks knew that all kinds of things could happen. They had the word democracy. That's where we get the word democracy, but they also had tyranny and oligarchy and plutocracy and kleptocracy, all of these other variants. So the first thing that we should register when we think of oligarchy is that oligarchy is one of the many things that can happen in politics. We tend to think we're democracy, democracy is us, but that's not the way history works. History is variety, and democracy is very difficult, in fact, and one of the things that can happen to a democracy is oligarchy. Okay, so what is oligarchy? First thing to notice from the Greek tradition is that oligarchy is set up in opposition to democracy from the very, very beginning. What do I mean by the beginning? By the beginning, I mean from the very beginning of history, from the very first history book. In the first history book, which is the Peloponnesian Wars by Thucydides, you have an opposition of democracy, which is Athens, and oligarchy, which is Sparta. So this is a clue. Democracy and oligarchy are at war. This is our very first history book. This is quite literally the beginning of our history. A bit later, Aristotle comes onto the scene, and he says oligarchy is not just rule by the few, which is its literal meaning in Greek. It's a rule by the rich few, by the wealthy few. The few who are in charge tend also to be the wealthiest people, which is a very important modification. Now, I mentioned earlier kleptocracy and plutocracy. These are kindred ideas. Kleptocracy means rule by thieves, also a very useful word. Plutocracy means rule by the wealthy, also very useful. We're going to stay with oligarchy. So Aristotle says oligarchy is rule by the wealthy few. And then Plato says, in Book 8 of the Republic, Plato says there's a danger in democracy. And the danger in democracy is that someone will come along, probably somebody with a lot of money, and will tell people what they want to hear, and democracy will break down. So if we put Plato and Aristotle together for a minute, we get a classical argument about the relationship between democracy and oligarchy, which is that democracy has the weakness that it's vulnerable to oligarchy. This is what the classic philosophers were worried about, and for this reason, by the way, the founding fathers were worried about it as well. So two things to note from the classics: democracy and oligarchy in opposition, but democracy can blend into oligarchy. And this is the reason why it's useful to have these words, because let's just say, I'll come back around to this, there's some chance that oligarchy is in our present or in our future. We need the word, we need the concept so that we can recognize it, so that we can see it coming. Okay, that brings me to the next thing that I wanted to say. Where has oligarchy come? Is oligarchy around in the modern world? Yeah, obviously it is. The reason why we use the word oligarchy now is that the thing, and therefore the word, appeared in the 1990s in Russia. The Greek word oligarchy jumped a couple of thousand years to Russia and appears in the 1990s. Why is that? Well, it has to do with the end of the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, there was central planning. There were relatively few assets. They were highly centralized. And the Soviet Union was also a state, like Russia is today, which was highly dependent on commodity exports, on the export of natural gas and of oil. When the Soviet Union falls apart, an attempt is made to privatize, to create a market economy without first establishing a firm and well understood rule of law. This led to a situation where all the best assets were taken by a small number of people, and other very clever people thought of arbitrage schemes with natural gas, which allowed them to make lots of money. So by the end of the 1990s, people in Russia were describing their own situation not as democracy, although there were elections, but as oligarchy. And the few people who were around the president of Russia, a man named Boris Yeltsin, were called the oligarchs. Russians also refer to them as his family. So the word oligarchy comes to us with the thing oligarchy from Russia in the 1990s. What Mr. Putin does, what Vladimir Putin does, is he says, since we're in an oligarchy, I'm going to fix the problem. I'm going to restore the state to the citizens. But what Mr. Putin actually does, in a very clever sleight of hand, is that he takes the oligarchy that he inherits from Mr. Yeltsin, and he chooses his own pet oligarchs. He merges some of the oligarchs with the state, and in fact turns the state into one giant, unified, and much more stable oligarchy. So again, some people prefer to refer to Mr. Putin's regime as kleptocracy, ruled by thieves. I'm fine with that. Some people might say plutocracy, ruled by the very wealthy, because they are very wealthy. But I prefer to stay with the term oligarchy here. Now, we can learn some things from Russia, because things that happen here often happen first in Russia. So what can we learn from oligarchy in Russia? One of the things we can learn is that it has a fundamental problem of rule, which I would refer to as oligarchical impotence. Oligarchical impotence has two problems. The first problem, and maybe the most basic, is that there isn't a succession principle. A succession principle is how one leader gives way to another leader. And this is extremely important. If you want your country to exist, if you want your government to exist, you have to have some idea how you go from one leader to the next leader. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons why democracy is actually such a wonderful thing to have, because democracy, in the sense of regular elections, it just settles this question. You don't have to think about it. The country is going to exist. The state is going to exist because we're going to go to the next election. Oligarchy, note, has no such succession principle. Rule by the few or rule by the rich few doesn't answer the question of what comes next. It's not like a monarchy where you can just say, well, my son is going to rule or my daughter is going to rule. Oligarchs will set up their sons and daughters. They will puff up their sons and daughters. They will give them lots of money, but there's no principle which says that these people ought to be the next rulers. So that's a problem. The second part of oligarchical impotence is that it's very difficult to make policy. So if you're a conservative and you like markets, and you're right, markets are good things. If you're a conservative and you like markets, then you'll notice this problem. It's very hard for oligarchs to make markets because oligarchs can't really accept the rule of law. For a market to work well for everybody, for people to be able to rise up and create small businesses or medium-sized businesses, you have to have the rule of law working for everybody fairly. What will happen in an oligarchy is that you will have people who are above the law, the oligarchs, their friends, their families, their business associates, and those people will be able to block the rule of law and therefore block prosperity and social advancement for everybody else, right? So markets will not work. Under oligarchy, there'll be no social advancement for that reason. The other way it's hard for oligarchs to make policy is it's very hard for oligarchs to redistribute. Oligarchs might talk about how they care about the entire country, all the population, the poor, etc. But because they are the rich and their friends are the rich, and they come to power representing the rich, it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely that they will make policies that redistribute wealth in a significant way. And without that, you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the healthcare, you don't have the education, you don't have the things that the state can do that help people advance socially and have better lives. Okay, so this brings us to the United States in the 2010s. America kicks off the 2010s with a very important Supreme Court ruling which is called Citizens United. Now, what Citizens United is the Supreme Court of the United States saying, we will now ignore everything that we have learned from classical history and from contemporary life and do what we can to make the United States more like an oligarchy. What do I mean? Well, in Citizens United, would-be American oligarchs came to the Supreme Court and said, look, we have lots of money and we would like to use this money to change the United States into something more like an oligarchy. Nobody is using the word, but that's basically the idea. We have unlimited money. We corporations, we would like to use this money to influence the population in ways that suits us. We as corporations would like to have that right. So in Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations were people for this purpose and ruled that money was a form of free speech. This is the kind of thing which classical philosophers were afraid would happen. And one of the things which is a bit sad about the Supreme Court ruling is that it pays so little attention to what everyone should know about the history of democracy. One would expect in the Supreme Court that these would be exactly the kinds of people who would be paying long attention to the problems of democracy, the difficulties of democracy, and not just making rulings which make democracy harder. Likewise, Citizens United ignores, in 2010, ignores exactly what's happening in Russia. Russia in Ukraine, other countries gave contemporary evidence about what happens when wealth gets too concentrated and a few people are in effect controlling everything. You can have regular elections, as Russia does, but those elections will be ever less democratic, which brings us to the United States. Is the United States an oligarchy today, 2017? Is Donald Trump an oligarch? Well, the United States is tottering between, I would say, democracy and oligarchy. Our elections still matter. I think we're actually in that moment where they matter more than ever because the rules of the game are at stake, and one of the rules of the game is whether we actually are a democracy or whether we will become an oligarchy. So please vote. On the other hand, the extreme concentration of wealth in the United States, which is coming to resemble the extreme concentration of wealth in Russia, means that a relatively small number of people and families, a few hundred families, unfortunately, can donate money and direct money, which determines who runs for office. We also have the problem that thanks to Citizens United, corporations or fronts for corporations can intervene in state elections all over the land and get their influence felt that way. So we are teetering. We are teetering. So what we do right now makes an awful lot of difference. Is Donald Trump an oligarch? This is tricky because as far as we know, and again, I'd be very happy to revise this opinion if we see Mr. Trump's tax returns, but as far as we know, he doesn't actually have any money, right? So in that sense, he's not an oligarch, that is in the Aristotelian sense, because as far as we know, he doesn't actually have any money. He didn't achieve power by having money. Insofar as he has money, this seems to be because ever less mysterious Russian investors helped him out over the course of the last 15 years or so, which would make him not a traditional oligarch, but some kind of transnational creation. I think the best way to think about Mr. Trump is that he is someone who wants to be an oligarch, or perhaps more specifically, someone who wants to be a Russian oligarch. The way that he behaves is very much the way that second-tier or rather third-tier Russian oligarchs behave. They look upward towards Mr. Putin and try to guess what Mr. Putin is going to want, and they say those things in advance. However, with Mr. Trump, we do get the problem of oligarchical impotence. We have the problem that Mr. Trump is pressing up against democracy as a succession principle. His idea of a federal commission to suppress votes all around the country pushes us away from democracy as a succession principle, which would be a very bad thing for a number of reasons. The second way that we see oligarchical impotence in the United States now is that there is no policy. There is no policy. We cannot expect policy from a would-be oligarch, from a wannabe oligarch that will benefit the population as a whole. I feel very comfortable predicting that so long as Mr. Trump is in office and he has a majority in both houses of the legislature, there isn't going to be policy that benefits the citizens as a whole. There will be attempts at tax cuts for the rich. There will be attempts at taking away things like health care from everyone else, but there will not be, because there cannot be, in the condition of oligarchy or wannabe oligarchy, which is where we are now, there cannot be policies that help people as a whole. It's extremely unlikely. So that's where we are. So you might be thinking then, all right, if we are in this condition of possible oligarchy, wannabe oligarchy, if we're tilting towards oligarchy, what does government actually do? Mr. Trump, after all, does act day to day, week to week, month to month. He does stand up and perform. What's actually happening with our government? And the answer is that in conditions of oligarchical impotence, you shift the task of government from doing anything to affirming identity. Government's no longer about doing, government is about being, which means that you talk all the time about who you are and who's good and who's bad and who's the enemy and who's the friend. And insofar as you make policy, and this is what I'm going to talk about next time, insofar as you make policy, there will be a clear tendency to make policy which actually hurts rather than helps your own followers. What you end up doing as an oligarch is deliberately hurting your own followers and asking them to applaud you. Mr. Trump is often called a populist. I don't think that's quite right. I think the thing at stake is more like pseudo-populism. And what pseudo-populism means and how you can govern by distracting and by causing pain, that's, I think, what I'm going to talk about next time. For now, thanks a lot for listening. It makes a great difference to me, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Okay, that was a little longer than we thought it would be, but that's okay. Rachel has an opening on Sinclair Lewis, and then we're going to lead back to a song that we would like to play.
Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny is a warning, but way before that, 1933, published in 1935, Sinclair Lewis wrote a book, It Can't Happen Here. And Ida Compton, who was actually a second mother to me, was very close to Sinclair Lewis, and he lived in the latter part of his life in Williamstown. But he wrote a book, It Can't Happen Here, and it's a warning, just like Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny is a warning. And the character in the book is Doremus Jessup, and he's a newspaper man, and he's describing, he was afraid, quote, he was afraid that the world's struggle today was not of communism against fascism, but of tolerance against the bigotry that was preached equally by communism and fascism. But he saw, too, that in America, the struggle was befogged by the fact that the worst fascists were they who disowned the word fascism and preached enslavement to capitalism under the style of constitutional and traditional Native American liberty. For they were thieves not only of wages, but of honor. To their purpose, they could quote not only Scripture, but Jefferson. Quote, more and more, as I think about history, he pondered, I am convinced that everything that is worthwhile in the world has been accomplished by the free, inquiring, critical spirit, and that the preservation of this spirit is more important than any social system whatsoever. But the men of ritual and the men of barbarism are capable of shutting up the men of science and of silencing them forever. And I think
we're in that era.
Yes, we are, and I think, as far as I'm concerned, we have never seen democracy come to fruition in the United States. And
No, because they set it up to be.
yes, and this has to be a lifetime
Anyway.
commitment, and this is part of why April 4th Coalition and my own television show, this is why we keep bringing this up. But we just saw Timothy Snyder in 2017.
Talking about
That's
it.
7 years before what is happening now. And
Right,
it's
because-
interesting to see his position, or hear his position, and
And
you
to
know,
see that he got it right, that
In
we
many
were
respects.
teetering, but I don't think we're teetering anymore. I think
Yeah.
the cliff has turned, the pendulum has turned, and at this point, it could possibly swing back, but Donald Trump would have to be so bad and go so
Donald Trump is the outcome of
of
years
all
and years
years
and years. But
of them leading this way.
Yeah.
But to swing the pendulum back again, because you might have one more election that matters. But I don't know that he has 4 years is enough time for him to get it firmly established that elections will no longer matter.
Well, I think this election we just had is questionable whether it mattered or
Right,
not.
what happened is,
Because
I think the American people thought it wouldn't matter because he didn't do
A
much.
lot, not all of us.
Not all of us, no. No, but I think the majority who voted, and a lot voted,
Yep.
thought it wouldn't matter, that this was still a traditional election and that they would have another chance 2 years down the road or 4 years down the road, 2 years down the road to limit, or 4 years. So they have to get an election that doesn't matter to start trending totally in the Republican direction again 2 years from now.
You and I
then
have an
4 years.
ongoing, continuing conversation because I think part of it is the parties. And when you see people that are unaffiliating from the parties, it's telling you that people do not believe that the work that's being done by entrenched
I know.
elected
we
officials. yes,
continually have that argument,
yes,
but I do see the trend going in the oligarch direction. We
yes, I
have
agree with you
about
on that.
4 minutes to go on the show,
Yep.
so we are going to end on a brighter note, this little light of mine,
Yes, I love that.
and we will see you next week.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
There's a little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Yes, there's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. May we know that together. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All in my room, I'm gonna let it shine. All in my room, I'm gonna let it shine. All in my room, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine. This little light, this a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This a little light, this a light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, shine, shine. Little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Bravo. Sounded good, thank you. Those are my cousins. My father's name is Holmes, and they were born in Birmingham, Alabama, so was I. And I figured there only had to have been one family that was Holmes, maybe distant, but I don't care, I adopted them. They are my cousins, Wendell, Sherman, and Popsy, the Holmes brothers. Thank you, Madame.
There's power in the factory, power in the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past will just a trench, he's full of mud. War's always been the bossy